Hello everyone and welcome to my final presentation. So the question is, what did I learn from my time spent in Switzerland? First being, I learned to find joy and appreciate being in the outdoors. I've always found time to go outside. I never really played video games as a kid. I played a lot of sports when I was younger. I ran a lot of track. I ran a lot of cross country. But the difference between that and here is just being in the environment, walking through the woods, hiking up the Swiss Alps, bungee jumping, being around this super, super clean water just kind of gives you a much deeper appreciation for the environment, or at least did for me, than I previously had. Second, commuting. Um, I learned to appreciate commuting. The residents of Switzerland have much less vehicles per capita than America. Their public transportation systems are much better, and this could possibly reflect on their low CO2 emissions. This is a graph that I have, and it shows that currently here in America, close to 80% of the time that we are commuting, we're driving alone. So that's a lot of wasted energy that could definitely be avoided. And I think that's really, really important thing to notice. I think I could still make a more conscious effort to take advantage of riding the bus or taking a train whenever possible instead of driving. I know that I can take a train from Newark all the way to Philly if I wanted to, and it's not too expensive. Plus, you'd avoid that entire trip and having to wait on stuff. Having to drive around in the city. I don't know about any of you, but I really hate that. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. Meat consumption. I kind of grown to appreciate that I don't need as much protein as I thought I did. I didn't know if it was because I was just visiting Switzerland, so maybe I hadn't had time to adjust and to find, all the right places to eat and where the inexpensive food was. But for the most part, it seemed like food there was relatively expensive, and they didn't consume as much meat as we do here in the States. And looking at some charts online, I see that the United States eats 279 pounds of meat per person per year, as opposed to Switzerland, which is almost half that at 159 pounds of meat per person per year. So that's a significant difference. Um, there's a lot of energy used in the meat industry and producing it and packaging it and just getting it to the consumer. And if we could reduce our meat consumption, we could definitely reduce our energy consumption as well. Natural sunlight, I really learned to appreciate this. A lot of the hostels we stayed in had big open windows that allowed more sunlight, so this made me think that I could definitely take more advantage of the natural sunlight at home whenever possible. Not to mention, it's great for your mental health. A little Harvard study that I looked read just recently says that sunlight and darkness trigger the release of hormones in your brain. Exposure to sunlight is thought to increase the brain's release of a hormone called serotonin. This is associated with boosting mood and helping a person feel calm and focused. That's opposed to melatonin, which is the hormone that's released at night when there's no sunlight. It makes us sleepy. But anyway, I'm going to use more natural sunlight whenever possible. How does this all come together? Between cutting back on transportation, reducing meat consumption, spending more time outside, all these things add up and would definitely make a significant impact on reducing my current energy consumption, especially if you were to consider a community committing to these changes in their lifestyle. I mean, that's a huge difference. And I think that we neglect that as an option. I think that we need to be some fancy scientist working in an R&D department or engineer or heavily involved in policy to make a difference, but we don't. All we really need to do is just spend a little more time focusing on what we do that's excessive, like leaving the lights on in the house, or leaving a door wide open, and then just blasting the AC to compensate for that. There's a lot of things that we can do to reduce our energy consumption. And if we can do that, then it would be more practical to incorporate renewables into our power grid, because although they don't generate as much energy, if there was less demand, then we wouldn't have the need to generate that much energy to begin with. So what could the state of Delaware and or the United States learn and apply from the Swiss people? Cooperative housing and affordable living spaces was a really big one. This was my favorite tour. I love architecture, for one. And not to mention, I was a little skeptical of their idea of the 2,000 watt society, but after taking a tour through these facilities, you start to kind of see how it comes together. One of the big things was that the solar arrays on the roof generate up to 40% of the energy required, and this wouldn't even be possible without the smart architectural design. So this has nothing to do with any fancy technology. This just has to do with a little bit of the psychology behind, why we do the things we do, and do we really need our own living room? Do we really need our own kitchen? And can we share a laundry room with other people effectively? Because if we can do this, then we end up conserving a lot more energy in the long run, and it just makes it a lot easier on us, and we're that much closer to becoming a carbon neutral society. Second was the 2,000 watt society. We could definitely incorporate something like this or along the lines of this here in Delaware. Just kind of encourage more of the holistic approach, that it's not just the solar panels, or it's not just the coal fire power plants. It's not just turning off the lights. It's all of these things. They kind of come together to create a more efficient society, to create a society that doesn't consume as much energy that we need in a better future for ourselves. So this is something that I think we could definitely look into, and at least get into the beginning stages of incorporating it into our society. This is kind of abstract, but I thought it was an interesting concept. But our transition from an agrarian to energy economy to an industrial energy economy. I'm going to do my best to try to explain my thought process behind all of this. But being that America is a relatively young country, we didn't have too much time to develop our culture through ecologically responsible agrarian methods. In addition, any prior culture who at that time was developing themselves through sustainable agrarian methods, also known as the Native Americans, had been completely wiped out. So there goes hundreds, if not thousands, of years of responsible cultivation methods and energy consumption in place of Europeans seeking to prosper in a new world. And in addition to that, America was founded, and not too long after that, we entered into the age of industrialization, and we had a lot of coal. So the mining industry was huge, and there was no need to really go through any of these superfluous methods of trying to come up with alternative energy generation, because we didn't know what we were doing to the society at the time. We didn't know how bad CO2 was for our atmosphere. So the reason why this is different than Switzerland's transition from an agrarian to an industrial energy economy is that Switzerland and its ancestors have been developing the country for hundreds of years and have adapted a lot of specific living standards intuitively based on the environment around them. This being said, they've gone through centuries of evolution without disruption, relying on an agrarian economy for most of that time, with the added benefit of having a surplus of fresh water and high elevation. They also didn't have coal. They didn't have access to too much coal, so any of these fossil fuels that they needed, for the most part, were imported during the Industrial Revolution. making it more practical to innovate on more renewable technologies, relying heavily on hydropower. Alright, so Switzerland consistently ranked at the top of the happiness and quality of life scales. Why? Chocolate. For one, I just want to start out with chocolates. Now, I don't have any studies proving that there is or has any relationship with increased happiness, but after much investigation and a few Google searches later, I was able to find this elaborate diagram expressing the relationship between happiness and chocolate. So as you can see here, yes, indeed, chocolate could be a reason for Switzerland's high level of enthusiasm. Moving on, money and wealth. Yes, money doesn't buy happiness, but it is still important. Now, the Swiss unemployment rate is around 3.5%. I talked to someone who was born in Switzerland, and he even said that if you don't want a job in Switzerland, at that point it's more of a personal choice, because if you are a Swiss citizen, for the most part, it's easy to find a job in Switzerland that they will help you out. Along with this, the average salary of a Swiss citizen is around $50,000 and is considerably higher with a college degree. Take this into account with the minimalistic and more or less highly sustainable lifestyle and the environment that they live in. I don't think there's as much of a need for an excessive amount of money to live a fulfilling life in Switzerland. It seems to me that you don't need too much with given all of the things that the environment and their culture is already giving back to you. Coming to an end, closely at least, time is very important. They understand the value of time, and Albert Einstein literally redefined it. For me, when things are going smoothly, when I'm doing well with my time management, I know for one that I'm a lot less stressed out, I'm a lot happier, and I can only imagine that having this trait instilled within your society and growing up with somebody who is like this and is really strict with time might not be the greatest in the beginning, but as you get older, you might learn to have a much deeper appreciation for this. So Benjamin Franklin famously states, "Those that love time, that do not squander time, for that is what life is made of." Lastly, being outdoors and commuting on public transportation, I relate to the relative good health. They have great public transportation. They have these awesome electric bikes that you can take anywhere you need to, because I know that Switzerland's a particularly hilly region, so even given that, you don't have to work too hard to ride a bike from one place to the next. You have these electric bikes that do most of the work for you. So with that being said, having all this access to great public transportation makes commuting a lot easier. It means you're going to spend a lot more time outside. You're going to be a lot more active, and being that physical activity is a stress reliever and exposure to sunlight increases happiness and reduces your risk of depression, I don't see a reason why it would be hard to be happy, given that you spend all this time outside. And even from my own experience being in Switzerland, it seemed to me that most of the people were in relatively good health physically and mentally.